Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. Hello, good evening. Welcome to the C3 stream, everybody. Happy Tuesday night. How we doing? We doing okay? We doing all right? Tuesday night, I have my tea this evening. Rocking the... So I always this side's got the Jesus on it, and then the other side talks about coffee. All I need is a little bit of coffee and a whole lot of Jesus. True enough statement. But it's actually got tea in it tonight. We're drinking caffeine free because it's 7:30 at night. Grabbing a snack. Okay, all right, Joe, go get the snack. It's cool. We'll wait for you. So welcome to the C3 stream. If this is your first time tuning in, Tuesday nights we do Tuesday night teaching, where we are walking our way through what we refer to as the curriculum. What we're using is called Divine Drama, and it is a 1-year look, basically of the Bible. So that's kind of what we've been doing. That's what we're tracking on. It's early on though. We're only on week 3, so the first 2 weeks was really just kind of setting it up. Last week we started to dip into the actual biblical story, and then this week we're going to go a whole lot more into Genesis, the Bible, looking at actual verses and stuff like that. So we're working through this curriculum called Divine Drama, week 3. If you ever miss a week, no big deal. You can always go back, check it out on YouTube. You can find it, track it down on this Facebook page that you're watching it on. So you can always go back and go down to the C3. If you're going to use YouTube, there's actually a playlist for you, and that makes it hopefully a lot easier for you. So thanks for joining tonight. Hopefully, if you do have your Bible, you want to grab it so it's nice and close at hand, because we're going to be tracking in it. Any Bible is great if you got one. If you don't have one, don't worry about it, because you can just watch the screen. I'll put the stuff up on the screen. But some people like to mark up in their Bibles. I encourage that. Like if you've got a Bible and you want to open it up, and then you can write in it, you can highlight stuff, and you can write in the margins, notes, and stuff like that. So I encourage you to do that if you have one close at hand. Otherwise, if you're just tuning in and you just want to watch, it's great. It's cool. Can do. So yeah. What else can I tell you? Joe, are you back from getting your snack yet? Give me a thumbs up or something when you're back. Divine plan. Oh, that's your favorite part. Okay. Yeah, anyone, feel free to drop in the comments. I'm curious. I'm going to start asking you every week. It's not a test. It's not a quiz, I promise. But I am curious about what you guys are remembering. What is it as you tune in and watch this and engage with this material, as you get to know the Bible in a much more deep way? What is it that stands out to you? What is the stuff that's grabbing your attention? So every week I'm going to try to ask you guys about whatever it is from the previous week that you remember most, or what stood out to you most. So I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to try to remember to do that from now on. So yeah, so you guys know. Let's do a little bit of recap from last week, just kind of picking up where we left off, and then we'll move forward into new content from there. Sound good? Sound like a plan? All right, let me do the fancy stuff. Hold on. Oh, wait, no, I got to do the fancy stuff. You guys ready for this? This is the video. Ready for the intro video? Here's your intro video. Aren't you just pumped after watching that? Like you're ready to go. I'm ready to go. Let's do it. We are ready to go after watching that, right? All right, here we go. Let's jump into the Divine Drama. How are you guys doing? Good. Oh, Joe's orange spice herbal tea from Minnesota. That's right. Welcome back from Minnesota, Joe. Glad you're back home. Loved the area you were up in. That's such a great. Glad you're back. But I hope you had a fabulous time up in Minnesota. Tonight I am drinking a caramel chai. I'm drinking a caramel chai. Hallie says, go ahead. Okay. All right, we're rocking and rolling, gang. Here we go. This is a recap from last week. This is where we left off. So some of this might look familiar for you. There we go. Zoom in just a touch. So let me just really quick always go over the symbols, the most important symbols. And the most important symbols are, for you, the circle, that has kind of a gavel in it and arrows sticking out of it. That is our symbol for God at the top center portion of the graphic. A circle is unbroken. It is perfectly unified. It has no beginning, has no end. And the arrows going out of it give us a sense of how God's character works, which is that he is outward focused. He is outward oriented. His concern and his natural disposition is to be concerned for the well-being of others, right? That's kind of God's character that he shows us. So that image of the circle with the arrows going out from it is our image for God. And the center of that is a gavel. Why is there a gavel there? Well, if you go to the bottom portion of the graphic there, there's a whole bunch going on there, admittedly, okay? Let's start with kind of the top right. There is an arrow that makes a circle in on itself. Okay, you see that? It's in a white lightning bolt coming in from the top right-hand portion of that graphic. And that arrow is that inward curvature. Okay, that's a theological image trying to convey and trying to capture sin and the way that sin works, the way that brokenness works. The way that brokenness works in our lives is when we become focused not on other people. Our arrows are not outward going, sadly. Unfortunately, because of who we are and just because of the way we're broken, we curve our attentions, our thoughts, and our concerns curve back in on us. Me, myself, and I. I am number one concern in my own life, right? And that's the natural disposition of humanity, of people, of you and me, is that we are concerned first and foremost for ourselves. And we prove that in the actions that we take and the decisions and in everything, the ways that we live our lives, that God continues to transform us and push us to be concerned, to reflect him, to be looking outward. But sadly, because of our broken nature, we tend to curve back in on ourselves. So that symbol of an arrow back in on itself is actually our symbol for the fancy word the Bible uses, sin, S-I-N. You've probably heard that word somewhere along the line. Non-Christians are familiar with that word. Mistake, sin, however you want to kind of umbrella it. So that's our image for sin. And the reason the lightning bolt is coming in is because this is picking up in the Bible in the beginning. We're starting at the beginning of the timeline. This is a narrative timeline look at the Bible, right? That's kind of what we're doing. So the narrative timeline look has us starting in Genesis with creation. God created the world and it was good. Sin enters the world. And when sin enters the world, it breaks apart the fabric of creation. It breaks apart relationship. It breaks apart, it fractures what God intended and reality. It fractures reality when sin enters. So that's what you see there in the graphic is sin, lightning bolt, enters and begins to break our world apart. And the first thing it does is it fractures or breaks the relationship between God and humans. You see like a small image of God, and then directly below him is an image of a man and a woman. Their hands are on their hips, kind of like defiance, kind of like I'm concerned about myself, hand on hips type kind of defensive posture. And so that's the first thing sin does, is it breaks the relationship between God and humanity, God and creation itself. The second thing, number 2, if you pop up there, you see kind of a lightning bolt snake kind of thing. And what happens there is sin breaks apart and fractures relationships between spouses, between people that you love most, between man and his wife, Adam and Eve. There is a fracturing of their relationship. Adam starts blaming Eve, and all of a sudden they're nervous about being in front of each other because they're naked and they're ashamed. They're now conscious of their own vulnerability. A lot of what marriage is being comfortable and totally open, totally transparent, totally vulnerable to another person. And sadly, because of sin now, that marriage relationship, there was shame, there was guilt, there was embarrassment, whereas before there wasn't. So that's happening in number 2. Drop down to number 3, kind of bottom left there, you get 2 men, hands on hips, with a dagger and a drop of blood. This is symbolizing the story of Cain and Abel. We see here how sin is kind of escalating. Okay, what started as a relationship between God and humanity, and that then moved into kind of spousal relationship. Now it's moving into brothers. Cain and Abel are brothers, and sadly, as sin continues to move outward, if you will, It also grows in terms of its violence, and it grows in terms of its consequence. Man, that's a better word choice. It grows in terms of its consequences, exponentially so. So all of a sudden we see murder happening in the Bible with the story of Cain and Abel, where Cain actually kills his brother out of jealousy and anger and rage. He kills his own brother. Number 4, you see what's supposed to symbolize like an angel wings and a woman there. A hands on hips woman. What's happening there is it's got to do with a very particular story in the Bible. It's kind of an odd one where there seems to be this whole thing happening between what the Bible refers to as the sons of God, and there seems to be suggestion that in the language, a lot of interpretation here, a lot of just kind of people wondering what this means, but one of the interpretive lenses is that the sons of God are like spiritual beings, like angels. Basically angels, if you will, and that angels have inappropriate relationships with women, okay? And the Bible doesn't go into the far details. It seems to suggest something almost sexual in nature, and certainly disruptive to the created order. Basically, something happened that shouldn't have happened, and it had to even potentially do with, spiritual beings in relation to humanity. That wasn't cool, not good. And it's, again, you see the sin kind of moving outward and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more dominant. And finally, you get to number 5 there. The Tower of Babel is what this story is referring to. You see a mouth and then two guys there. And that's the story of the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is when humanity gets together and says, hey, we're awesome, we're cool. We are going to build a tower, a temple. We're going to build something so great and so awesome to ourselves as a legacy that we will be able to touch heaven itself. That we're going to build to ourselves a monument to the awesomeness of us that will basically rival God's awesomeness. And God's like, yeah, no, this is not good. Not pride is running rampant. What you started with just 2 people is now happening in the context of entire groups of people, even large numbers, volumes of people, right? I love it. Katie Matson family's in Missouri now. Awesome. That's right. You guys were joining us on Sunday, and I even saw the U-Haul. You guys are incredible. What a testimony to faith and church family that you guys came to church, you worshiped together, and then the U-Haul literally pulled out from church. It's just pretty cool. It was neat. I got to see your family from afar. Katie just kind of enjoying. So are you on the trip with them? Are you driving out to Missouri with them? Okay. Is everybody going out together? I didn't know if everybody's going together or not, but curious. I love it. You're streaming. Never miss a night. Any chance to study the Bible together, guys. I love it. All right, so there you go. Sin has entered the story to the point now where society, culture, things are getting messy real fast. Stuff's getting messy. All right, here we go. Next graphic. New stuff. So here, one of the things that we're going to keep doing with this curriculum, and one of the reasons why I like this curriculum, is because it does a good job of pulling out narrative themes and showing us, not just getting at what the stories are. We'll do that more and more, get at the actual stories and the actual text. But this curriculum tries to capture with pictures what's happening in the text and what are the theological implications. What's the spirit stuff that we need to take note of as people. And here it tries to convey an image of the top left. You can see kind of rings. You see that? And the idea here is ripple effects. This is one of my favorite word choices to describe sin. Sin has ripple effects. If you take a stone and you throw that stone into the center of a lake, it not only causes an immediate reaction, but it will have corresponding ripple effects. And that is sin. That's just sin, period. When you do, let me give you a simple example. If, what's a simple example? If I get into a fight with my wife and I say mean things. Okay? I do dumb things. And just like Adam and Eve got after it, I get after it with my wife. There are going to be ripple effects to my comments, right? I mean, you know that. You can see that. You can see how that would work. There are going to be ripple effects. It's not just my comment, but what my comment does there in terms of her character, her identity, her thoughts, her feelings, her emotions, her actions. If here's a simple example. If you've ever had an argument with your spouse and then you're just like in a bad mood the rest of the day and then you yell at your kids, you guys ever done that? I'm pretty sure everybody's done that. Where you yell at somebody else because you're just in a bad mood. Somebody puts you in a bad mood because of an argument, and then you end up passing that same sin, pain, and arguments on from what you received onto others. Same concept, okay? That's what this is trying to convey, is what started with in the Garden of Eden, now is having ripple effects, and having ripple effects in a wider and wider geography, if you will. It started with the Garden of Eden, then it moves to the fields with Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, now all of a sudden they're in fields, and then out into the rest of creation itself. That it didn't just stay with two people and in one specific location, but that sin and brokenness continued to expand and grow. What started with just Adam and Eve as kind of like their parents, as the first two, got passed on to their offspring, onto their kids, onto their sons, Cain and Abel, and then on further and further out into other people and into the created order. So that's what you see there, is you see the arrow kind of going over and looping over. That's trying to convey how sin moved through its ripple effects into a greater and wider. I mean, it just got out of hand. Sin just spiraled out of control. Bueno from Missouri. I love it. Be safe in Missouri. Mike, I love it. That's fabulous. You guys are on YouTube. Awesome. So cool, guys. Love it. Tuning in from across the country. Sweet. So this graphic tries to convey those ripple effects in the top left-hand side, and then in the bottom right-hand side, it starts to get into the story of Noah. Okay, Noah is largely considered to be a really confusing, bizarre, controversial story, frankly. There are flood stories in a variety of different traditions, religions, and histories. This is one located within the Judeo-Christian tradition. And we're not going to spend too much time on it right now. Why? Because I think coming up in... Yeah, probably talk about it there. No, we should talk about it here. Okay, so here's what happens. Noah. Let's talk about Noah. I don't want to spend too much time on Noah, though, because we can get distracted by Noah's story. So, Noah, God looks at the earth, and he's seeing all the ripple effects and how sin is just spiraling out of control. Okay? There's more violence, fear, anxiety, evil, and it's spiraling out of control. God looks at the earth, and he's just heartbroken. God looks at creation, and he's heartbroken. What started in the beginning as good now is in shambles, is totally broken open, and is bleeding all over the place from self-inflicted wounds. Oh, wait a minute. We got a good question here. Okay, good question, Michelle. No. Angels don't have... I don't want to get... You're right. So, Michelle has a good question. The question is in relation to the story about the Nephilim and the angels and women and what went on there. Like I said, it's a lot of reading into it that we really can't determine. What we know is something inappropriate happened. What that was, what kind of happened. Let's go to the text real quick. Let me see if I can find it for you. What is that in? Genesis 4? Maybe it's later in that. Yeah, it's Cain and Abel. We're doing a sidetrack, guys. This is one of the nice things, is that we can actually do these sort of things together. As always, guys, I try to emulate basically this is a class. So when you use the comments, I watch the comments. So if you have questions and stuff. Okay, here we go. I'll show you in the text. Let's go to the text. So here you go. So the question has, having relations with women, are all angels male? What's going on here? So here's what happens. This is Genesis chapter 6. I'm in the New Living Translation. That's what's happening. A world gone wrong. So I guess this supports what we're talking about, right? This is to show, this is a story that is supposed to capture and convey the significance of the ripple effects of sin. Track on that? Then the people began to multiply on the earth. Daughters were born to them, the sons of God. And that's the big question of how to interpret that word is a really complex one. The Hebrew is along the lines of spiritual angels. It doesn't use the word that we would assume for just a normal person, a normal guy. The sons of God saw beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time. They're only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be 120 years. In those days and for some time after, giant Nephilims lived on the earth, for wherever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. All right. So for most of us, when you read this, and this particular translation doesn't do a good job of it, when you read this, you're like, what's the big deal? Why? What? But when you begin to look into it a little bit more carefully with some of the word choices and language, this is an angry statement. God's not happy by what's taking place here. So he's limiting, he's putting limits on life and lifespans. Again, the sons of God, this translation, it has to do with a word choice and would suggest spiritual. This one actually gets as blunt as to say intercourse. Sometimes it's like, and they knew the women. That's like in the biblical. Yeah, it's even like a phrase, right? And he knew her in the biblical sense. That means they got together and had intercourse. So, and the Nephilites are like these giants who lived on earth, all right? Heroes and famous warriors. Please don't get bogged down in this, though, okay? Please don't get bogged down in this. What this is trying to do is convey and capture that sin is getting out of hand, even to the point where people who are supposed to be, the sons of God, even those who would be associated with God himself, bad things are happening to them too. Brokenness and the cracks of broken. It's kind of like if you took a mirror and you took a baseball bat or threw a baseball at the center of a mirror. The spider web of cracks that come out of it, those spider cracks of sin stretch all the way into the spiritual realm and into God's people, into God's realm, into what God's about. Okay? And so that's what this is trying to convey, and that's what this is trying to capture. So please don't get caught up on the details. Not to. So Michelle, to answer your question more directly, no, it's not. It's not that like all angels or spiritual beings have a particular sex, are male or are female, particular gender or anything like that. It's more along the lines of this story was trying to show how they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing, and it didn't make God happy. In fact, here we go. This is picking up. I shouldn't have even changed the screen. Literally, immediately following that, you get the story of Noah. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. Dum, ba, bum, ba. Like, that's the one you underline. Basically, that says, man, it's the pits. Sin has taken hold of creation. So much so that, when God looks at people and he looks at what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're oriented towards, it's consistently and totally evil. Evil is now running the show. And he's heartbroken. It broke his heart. He's heartbroken by this. This is not what he intended. This is not what he hoped for. When he first created the earth, he looked at it with joy, satisfaction, pride. He says, it is good. And now he's looking, this is like looking at your own kid and seeing nothing but evil and pain and hurt, and it breaks your heart. That's what God did. He looked at us, he looked at the world, and he saw the pain, the hurt, the suffering, and was filled with disappointment, filled with remorse, filled with pain himself. And so he makes the decision to hit the reset button. He says, yes, I will destroy every living thing. I'm going to do a clean wipe. He says, look, if people continue to spread sin wherever they go, and it's spreading not only from people, but it's literally spreading into creation by this point, okay? People miss that. Sometimes people limit sin to just being like you and me, humans. Sin is much more expansive. It's disrupting the created order. Hence the story up here that we just talked about. It's disrupting the created order. That, everything down to like, the way earthquakes and tsunamis and bad stuff happens in the world. The created order is out of sync. The Apostle Paul talks about this later on, guys, when he talks about all of creation is groaning for a new heaven, new earth. Okay? So God looks at the earth, his heart is broken, and he says, look, I'm going to do a very hard thing. I will try to hit the reset button on all of this. And he finds one guy named Noah. And he says, maybe Noah seems like a decent guy. Noah seems like a legit dude. So, Noah, we're going to start over with you. We're going to start over with you. And because you're a legit guy, I keep changing it because I like the graphic, but then I read the next verse. Noah found favor with the Lord. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So Noah's a good guy. God saw the earth had become corrupt, filled with violence. God observed all the corruption in the world, for everyone on earth was corrupt. Do you get a repeating theme? So God pulls Noah aside and says, all right, I'm going to wipe everybody out. We're hitting a reset button, and I am restarting this year. I'm choosing you, Noah, and I'm doing the reset. Noah listens to God, builds a boat, and does all this stuff. It's a fascinating story. And just about perseverance and God. Ironically, interestingly enough, a lot of people look at this story and they see nothing but God's wrath, God's judgment, which is why there's a gavel in the center of this picture. God doesn't like sin. Sin not good. Does judge sin. Sin not good. He judges it as being wanting. So sin is not good as far as God is concerned. Violence, evil. So it hits the reset button with Noah and his 3 sons. You can see them there, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. But here's what happens. Before you get all excited about this, we learn that Noah's attempt, or God's attempt at Noah as a reset, ultimately fails. Doesn't pan out the way God hoped. Okay? Why is that? Well, Noah builds the boat, does all the faithful stuff. God has the flood, says, I'll never do it again. I promise I'll never hit the reset button again. Noah, please don't screw this up. And one of the first things Noah does is he plants an orchard. Now, on the outset, that sounds fine. Like, yeah, hey, cool, orchard. It is followed by Noah doing what broken people do. Noah makes wine and he gets plastered. The guy gets toasted. The first thing he does when he survives the flood that's supposed to wash away all the brokenness, all the selfishness, all the foolishness, the first thing Noah does is something dumb and foolish. He's like, I need a beer. And he doesn't have just one. He drinks an orchard's worth of wine. Unbelievable. What does it show? Noah gets drunk. And it shows that Noah is broken too. Noah is broken too. Bummer. God had hoped that Noah would be the kind of guy and character that he could, the kind of person that he could bring the restoration, bring things back to good. But evil by this point in time, sin by this point in time, had too significant of a grip. It was too widespread. It had touched every human heart from here on out. This is why everyone, there is no one exempt from the touch of sin and brokenness. Even Noah gets drunk. Noah gets drunk and he falls backwards in his tent naked. Bum is flying, flapping in the breeze. And one of his sons comes in, Ham comes in, and sees his dad naked. Now, in our context, in our vernacular, back then, this was culturally, this is a big deal. Culturally and historically, super significant. You are never supposed to witness your parents' shame. Ham does. Ham looks upon his own father's sin, brokenness, nakedness, drunkenness. Ham is witness to Noah's big mistake, and you're never supposed to look upon your parents with that type of an attitude or framework. And that actually is something, the Bible kind of, like the language kind of makes it say like, maybe just weird stuff happened again. It's like something shady, dumb happened. Ham said something or did something, like something weird went on. And the relationship between Noah and Ham, his own son, from then on is poisoned. Which again shows sin stemming from Ham and stemming from Noah, because relationships are broken now. Even family relationships are still broken. So Noah ends up cursing his own son, Ham, and curses his descendants. Fascinating. His son, Ham's son, is Canaan. That's his name, Canaan. And later on, you will learn and hear a lot about the Canaanites, who are his descendants under a curse. In fact, they end up being one of the big bad guys later on in the story, the Bible. The Canaanites end up totally rejecting God, worshiping idols, creating their own gods, and doing a lot of bad, weird stuff. So you can trace it all the way back to this brokenness piece. So there you go. That's kind of the snapshot of Noah. Not a highlight. People think of it as this big, wonderful, fabulous moment of faithfulness. What the story of Noah is trying to do is show how, sin is here, and sin is here to stay, with the exception of something truly grand and truly outstanding, that redemption and salvation cannot come from within humanity. That's what this shows. Let me say that again. Redemption and salvation cannot come from within humanity itself. It's got to come from God. Noah was the attempt, and it ultimately failed. Wah, wah. All right, he's got two other kids, Japheth and Shem. Japheth and Shem have more kids and more descendants, and then eventually you get the story of the Tower of Babel, which we kind of covered already. And that's what that lower part of the graphic is. You see a tower there. That's a ziggurat, a temple. And people gathered around it, trying to build it up, right? Trying to become like God, ruling the heavens like God rules. And God's looking at all of this, and he's just, He's realizing the reset didn't work. This is not going good. And so now sin, he scatters the people is the phrase. He scatters the people of the earth throughout the rest of the earth. Now you have people carrying sin everywhere they go. He scatters them to the far winds, and as the people go out, so also sin goes with them. Wherever people go, sin tracks. Brokenness comes too. Wah, wah. All right. How we doing? We all tracking still? Any more good questions? I'm not missing any, am I? Nope. Okay. This is a good graphic. This is a good graphic because it shows, it helps to try to describe for us part of God's character here. What I mean by that is this shows movement and cycles and themes. At the top, you've got God, who, top left, God created the world and creation and us, hands upraised, and it was good. Like everything's chummy and good. Sin enters the world. And as sin enters the world, bad stuff, judgment follows. The first major judgment that God places upon Adam and Eve is to say that, hey, from now on you die. Death, as sin enters the world, so also does God's judgment or pronouncement of death. That he will not allow people to live forever in the state of sin, that they have to die. And yet, even as he makes the judgment of death, which someday he will transform, he will raise the dead, okay? We see an act of grace, a sense of providence, a sense of how God will work for the well-being of his creation despite their sin and despite their brokenness. God makes and mends clothes for them. That's why you can see the little people there have like little outfits on. The reason is because in the scriptures is shortly after he says that they're going to die, he does something nice for them, conveying that God's character has not changed. God's love and heart and desire to bring about good has not changed. So even as humanity is wallowing in its shame and embarrassment, God intervenes and makes clothes for people. Gives Adam and Eve a set of Levi's to put on so they're not embarrassed. Then you see another cycle. You see the Cain and Abel. You see murder. The judgment is expulsion. God says to Cain, you can't hang out here anymore where your family, you can't hang out at home anymore. You need to leave. You can't hang out in the garden anymore. So he casts him out and he says, you got to wander the world. You got to go out into the rest of the world and make your own way. You got to pave your own way. You can't have the support, love of your family. You can't have this environment that is so conducive, the garden. You can't have this environment that is so healthy and vibrant. Instead, you're out, man. You're gone. But even as he goes, God places a mark or a symbol, a sign on him that says, as you travel, I will still protect you. As you meet other people, as you go about the world, and as you go, you will have the mark of Cain, which is actually a mark of protection. Rather than killing the killer, God casts him out and yet still says you're going to live a full life. Another measure of kindness, grace, love that was unwarranted, you know? Cosmic confusion, that's that whole thing about sin creeping in, even having like bad relationships happening between, angels or spiritual beings and humanity, kind of showing how bad things have gotten. Judgment, the flood, the reset button, and yet even as God does the reset button, he says, you know what, I'm going to give it a try with Noah. Like, I'm going to hit this reset button. He could have hit the reset button, period, and just left humanity out of it. He could have just said, done, game over, great experiment, totally failed. Not doing that again. But instead, he chooses to focus on Noah and see if he can, his relationship with Noah and see if Noah has the capacity, has the ability to bring about the goodness once again. So you see this measure of God's salvific heart kind of shining through. And then you get the Tower of Babel. And, the dispersal, the scattering of the peoples is kind of what he does. He says, okay, even great groups of people, entire cities of people, it's just sin has spiraled out of control. So he casts them out all together, scatters them across. But as we're about to see, even as he scatters entire cities now, nations, confusing their languages, you see on the right-hand side how it starts with really wide and gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's because God's focus, the scope of his work, starts really big with all of creation. But as sin creeps into more and more creation, the scope of what God is going to do and where he's focusing his attention gets increasingly narrow, down to one particular guy. What starts with all of creation, his focus narrows from the human race itself to one specific person named Abraham. And really, chapters 1 through 11 of Genesis is what we just covered. We just covered chapters 1 through 11. Everything that follows in the rest of the Bible, everything that follows here on out in the Bible has to do with Abraham, including Jesus. It has to do with Abraham. What we've seen through chapters 1 through 11, summary statement, brokenness stinks, and it's very thorough. It's everywhere, right? So brokenness is here, and it appears to be here to stay, like, goodness gracious. It doesn't even go away with a flood. Brokenness is rampant. And 2, it's going to take not humanity, but God. It's going to take God to intervene, to rescue humanity, to redeem, to get it back to being good. It's not going to happen because of something inside of me, inside of you, inside of us as people. It's going to take God himself. It's going to take God as the primary actor in salvation. It's not going to happen from humanity. So chapters 1 through 11 is all really kind of trying to describe and help us understand the significance of sin that we see in our world. I mean, it's trying to make sense of the world that you and I live in. As they're telling these stories to Jewish rabbis, are telling these stories to Jewish boys and girls, handing these stories down from generation to generation to our current generation, to us, they're trying to articulate and help you make sense of why the world is so messy. And in doing so, trying to communicate to you, yes, the world is messy, and yet God is doing something about it. God isn't just letting the world be messy for the sake of letting it be messy. He desires that it be good, that you be good, that your life be good. And so everything from the story here on out has to do with how God is going to use Abraham and the story that stems from Abraham to bring the world back to being good. Fair summary, everybody? Not too bad? Genesis 1 through 11. Beautiful, clever stories that capture and try to convey huge significance in our making sense of our reality. That's what it's doing. Here on out is all about Abraham. It's all about this dude, Abe. It's all about this guy named Abraham. So let's talk Abraham. How we doing? Any questions? No? Okay. Matson family still driving? Making your way to Missouri. You're probably in Missouri by now because you guys left yesterday, Tuesday. Today's Tuesday, so you should, I mean, you're there, right? Hello from Missouri. Okay, hearing no questions, guys. I'm going to keep moving. Cool. If you do have one, pop it on there. All right, let's go to Genesis. Here we're going to dive into the text a little bit. So if you got your Bible, now's a great time to pull it out. And you can go to Genesis 11. Genesis chapter 11. It starts with the Tower of Babel. Skip down to verse 31. Nope, 27. Let's go to 27. So, let's talk about this guy named Abram. Do you guys ever sing that song growing up? Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. Do you guys know the one? So let's... Okay, all right, I'll stop. You guys there? Genesis 11, verse 27. This is the account of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram. That's who he is. Ashley Nowak. Good. Singing to the kiddos. You know the one I'm saying. Yeah, you got to get all the kids singing that. You got to start singing that. Try to get it stuck in Joe's head. That's funny. All right. Abram. So before he was Abraham, he went by the name Abram. Did you know that? So it's really like Father Abram. But as we'll find out, it becomes Ham. Yep, get it stuck in his head. That's super fun. So Terah is the father of Abram, and he's got some brothers, Nahor and Haran. We don't really hear anything about them later on, but we do find out about his nephew Lot. Okay, so there's Abram and Abram's nephew Lot. Abram is married. His wife's name is Sarai. See that? Before she's Sarah, she's Sarai. But you'll notice Sarah was unable to become pregnant and had no children. So Abram and his wife Sarah, father's name is Terah. You tracking? Terah's got a kid. Abram, married. Sarah, no children. Your Bible study group sang it. I love it, Michelle. That's great. It's a lot of fun. And that's an old school classic song. Remember growing up? And, yeah. Here's where it gets important, though, guys. Verse 31. Here's why this is big. Are you paying attention? One day, Terah took his son Abram and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and his grandson Lot, that would be Abram's nephew, and he moved from Ur of the Chaldeans. All right, Ur of the Chaldeans. This is Babylon. Chaldeans is another way of saying Babylon. Iraq? This is what I'm saying. Ur of Iraq, a city in Iraq. Okay? And he moves away from Iraq, and he was headed for the land of Canaan. But he stopped. It's almost kind of funny, guys. So we talk a lot about in Christian circles, and in Judeo-Christian circles, we talk about Abraham head west, young man. He heads towards the land of Canaan. And what we find is actually that his father started the process. Abram's father packs up the family belongings and starts heading west towards the Mediterranean. To do that, he would have traveled north first and then cut across west. If he would have gone directly west across to Iraq and Iran and the desert and kind of all that stuff that's in there, Middle East, very arid, very dry. If he would have cut across the Arabian Peninsula and stuff, it would have gone a no-go. But from where we can kind of guess Ur of the Chaldeans was, Ur of the Chaldeans would have been, southeast. He probably would have gone a little bit north and west, following the the two rivers. There's two major rivers there. It is what are the name of the rivers? The Euphrates and Ruh-roh. Didn't brush up on my biblical geography. What's the other big river there, guys? Oh, that's going to bother me. It's Mesopotamia. Come on now. Yeah, the rivers. Come on. Tigris. Right? Oh, give me the graphic. Please hold. I'm looking at it. Looking. Yeah, it's the Euphrates and the Tigris. Okay. So I don't have legal permission to use this graphic. Otherwise, I would. It's the Euphrates and the Tigris. If I could show you the graphic, I would, but I don't have legal permission to do so. But if you were to Google those two rivers, you'd see. And if you Google it's down kind of like south of modern-day Baghdad. It's by the Persian Gulf. And basically, when you think about the ancient world, those two rivers, it's the only fertile area in the entire Middle East. Those Euphrates and the Tigris were the two fertile rivers. The rains would come, the rains would flood those rivers, the rivers would overflow their bank, and they would make this soil fertile for farming. And so all the farming, all the cities, all the major population all stemmed and lived along those two rivers. Okay, that's how it worked in the ancient world. So what happens is Abram's father is hanging out near the Persian Gulf, kind of down in Iraq, if you will, kind of like the southeast corner of Iraq, and he starts working his way up the Euphrates River, hoping someday to cross all the way across. He's going to work up, and then he's going to cut across left to go to the Mediterranean Sea. That's what's tracking there. Okay. But he doesn't make it. He settles in a place called Haran, and he dies. So now Abram is hanging out in this place called Haran with his wife and his nephew. And he's hanging out there. Genesis 12. Here's where things get spicy. Things change. This is the beginning of, well, salvation as we know it, guys. Hey-o. All right, chapter 12. If there's a big chapter in Genesis for you to remember, it's probably chapter 12. This is where it begins. This is where Jesus, so to speak, it's not where he begins. Don't mishear me there. Don't get into the theology there. What I'm saying is this is where God intervenes through a specific man named Abram. And from here on out, every book of the Bible has to do with this guy and his legacy. And this is where God comes to him. The Lord said to Abram. So this is like out of the blue. All right. So God just shows up in Abram's life. Abram's hanging out in Haran. His dad died and didn't make it. His dad had always talked about having a new farm out in the Mediterranean coastline and swimming in the Mediterranean Sea. And gosh, wouldn't that be great to bounce my grandkids on my knee looking in the Mediterranean, you know, with lakefront property out there on the coastline. But he doesn't make it. And that's like where his story stops. So Abram is sitting here. We have no indication that Abram has any relationship with God up till now. We have no ability to know. And in fact, it would be unlikely. Let me say it again. It would be unlikely that Abram or his father Terah would have had any experience with the living God prior to this verse. It's actually a huge theological statement. God comes to you. You're too broken to come to God. God is the one intervening and drawing close to you. That's what he does with Abraham. That's what he does with all of us. God shows up and calls us, and he interrupts our lives. I always laugh when people ask me if I've found Jesus. You guys ever seen that? Have you ever found Jesus? Did you find, it's kind of like, flip that around, buddy. Read your Bible. Read the Bible, and you'll find that, man, Jesus and God, they're the ones coming to broken people. And that's what happens in Abraham's story. The Lord said to Abraham. So he shows up in Abraham's life, and he all of a sudden gives him some really big promises. He says, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make. So anytime you see these two words, I will, from God, we consider that a promise. This is a promise. I will. You know, when my kids say, hey, Dad, this morning, my little one came into the room and said, hungry. Just one word. And kind of a demand. If you ever want to know if brokenness, when it starts, it's from the beginning. She came into my room. I am sleeping peacefully. And she demanded food. Okay? Why? Inward curvature of sin. Did she look upon her father and think, oh, Father of mine, you work so hard to provide and care for me, my mother, my sister. You labor and slave hard. The least that I could do is allow you another 5 minutes of sleep. No. She looked at me as I was snoozing and sleeping and said, hungry. I think is the technical term. Hungry. And I looked at her and I said, I will make you breakfast. That was me making a promise to my child. I will do this. That's my promise. I will. No different with God. When God says, I will, that's a promise. And promises are really big for the Bible. So when Jesus says, I will, that's Jesus making promises to you and me. I will resurrect you from the dead. That's a promise. Okay? Promises are big. Promises are very, very big in the Bible. And it also shows the primary actor here. The primary actor is not Abram, God. Who's going to do whatever happens next? God is going to do whatever happens next. I will make you into a great nation. Boom. Step 1. I will make you into a great nation. Look at that. Family. Actually, the first thing is I will show you the land, right? Sorry, I skipped right past that because of the translation here. Step 1 is I will give you land. Step 2 is I will give you family, descendants, legacy. And step 3, I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. What I like here is this graphic. All right, so here's a graphic for you describing this. You have God, the circle, and the arrows. The arrow is going to the man, and the man is Abram. Notice that Abram is not an upstanding guy with his arms raised. He doesn't have this great relationship. He's not this holy saint. Anytime you think that the major characters in the Bible have it all together, woo! You got to read your Bibles, as we'll find out with Abraham. Not the case. He is one super messy dude, which is one of the reasons I personally love him. God comes to Abram and starts making these promises, and there on the scroll, you can see the promises that he makes. The top one, go away. There we go. The top one is land. The first thing God says is, "Hey, I'm gonna bring you. I will show you. I will give you this land." Don't get caught up on the word show versus give. It depends on what translation you're reading, and it depends on other parts of Scripture that we'll look at in the next couple weeks. But I will give you land. That's the first promise. And this makes such a big deal that even to this very day, Zionist movements in the 1900s, modern day Israel, it's based on this. Modern day Israel is based on the idea that God gave Abram and Abram's descendants this land. Okay. Number 2, you see the people, like the little family unit there, the guy, the gal, and the little kiddos, that you will be a great nation. You're going to have kids. You're going to have lots of kids. Oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles of kids. You're going to have descendants. And then number 3 is an interesting graphic. Number 3 is a cup overflowing. The idea there is that what begins with Abram and Abram's family will flow through him. It will flow out of him. His cup will overflow into the lives and the well-being of the rest of the world. He will be a blessing to others. Eventually it says, here we go. Take back to the text. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who treat you with contempt. And here we go. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. That is the benchmark for the promise of Jesus' salvation coming through the Jews. Right there. These couple verses. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. This is God saying that through you, Abram, I will bring about this redemptive plan that I have in store. Okay? So those are the big three things. Oh my goodness, it's already 8:30, guys. Wow. I prepared another 10 slides. Am I that gabby? I've just been talking, huh? But it's good stuff. The point of this series, in case you're wondering, is for us to take our time and get to know these characters and get to know what's going on. So I'm going to finish this graphic and then we'll be done for tonight. So let's jump back to the graphic. So God comes to Abram as he's hanging out in Haran and says, I'm going to lead you to land, and I'm going to give you a family, descendants, and your family is going to be a blessing to all the nations. We call that the call of Abraham. In Genesis 15, so just 2 chapters later, I'm going to it right now. See if I want to show you anything about it. That's Genesis 14. In Genesis 15, that promise is reiterated. God gives him a vision. He says, sometime later, this is Genesis 15, okay? Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision, a dream, and said, do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great. Abram replied, O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Basically, he's saying, hey, I don't have a kid yet, and you said I'd have descendants. I don't own any land. I have no descendants. I don't even have a kid. So if you want to jumpstart this, God, now is the time. And he comes up with his own plan. He says, since you've given me no children, I'm going to leave it to Eliezer of Damascus. That's the best next thing. You've given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir. God says, no, that's not the plan. I told you I would do this. I promised that I would give you an heir. In fact, look up into the sky and count the stars. That's how many descendants you will have. So God says, no. My word is true. I promised you before. I will deliver. It's just on my timetable, and it's going to be in my way. Abraham, he believes it. This is one of the most significant verses in the Bible as well. Genesis 15, verse 6. Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord credited it to him as righteousness because of his faith. He counted him as righteous because of his faith. I mean, this is huge. This is saying what made the relationship between Abram and God right wasn't that Abram was a good guy. In fact, it's almost like the verses directly before it. He's kind of critiquing God. He's saying, God, what the heck, man? WTF? You told me this was going to happen. He's pretty spicy here. He's kind of doing this backhanded, it's not even back, he's pretty in your face. That's pretty bold to say to God, hey, you said I was going to have a son, and I don't. It's kind of like it's your fault, God. God says, no, I promised. And Abram believes him. And so the relationship is made right, not because of anything Abram's done, but simply because Abram trusted and believed God when God said, I'm going to be true to my word. I'm going to come through for you, Abram. Okay? He's still, even though he has faith here, it's followed by, I brought you out of Ur to give you this land. It's immediately followed by, yeah, but how can I be sure? So even as soon as we get this sense that Abraham believes, doubt creeps right back in. So before you say like, wow, Abram, what a rock star, it's immediately followed by Abram full of doubt. And then this weird thing happens. The Lord said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a goat, some animals. Give me some animals, Abram. Abram presented all these to him and then killed them. And he cuts them in half. Ugh. Super weird. Why in the world is Abram taking a goat and a heifer and animals and chop them in half? This is an old style promise that was common in the ancient world. In the ancient world, you would take animals and you would cut them in half. And the idea was you and whoever you're making your business deal with, whoever you're making your promise to, whoever you're making a covenant with, you would walk between the two halves of the animals. Yes, that sounds gross. Your feet are walking, you would walk barefoot through the blood of the animals. Yes, for realses. And the idea was, let it be to me as these animals are if I break the covenant. If I don't come through, then let what has happened to these animals happen to me. Okay, that makes sense? So Abram sets all the stage, he gets everything ready, and then he falls asleep. Abram falls asleep, and while he's asleep, he sees a smoking pot. He sees a fire pit and a torch pass between the carcasses. He sees the representation image of the living God move between the animals. Theoretically, Abram and God should have walked between the animals, but instead it's just God. God walks through the animals, and in doing so, God is saying, I promised I will come through. Let it be on me as God to make this happen. And if it doesn't happen, let me as God be like these animals. And so God, it says in verse 18, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham that day. This is no small thing. God has made this promise to do these amazing, incredible things in and through the life of a guy named Abram. And it's entirely God's promise and God's grace, God's work. God came to Abraham. God made the promises. And God went so far as to say, look, I will follow through, even to the point of making this covenant relation, a promise sealed in blood type of relationship with you. All right, that's all we're going for tonight. Sorry, it's 8:37. I went 7 minutes over. That's what we got for tonight, guys. Woo! We didn't get nearly as far as I thought we would, but that's okay. Who cares? We had fun, didn't we? Hope you guys had a good time. Hopefully you have that song stuck in your head for the rest of the night about Father Abraham. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight on C3 Stream, doing the Tuesday night teaching, Divine Drama. Picking it up next week, we'll pick up with more Abraham. In fact, we're going to check out a whole bunch more with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are the 3 patriarchs of the Jewish faith. So we'll be talking about those guys stemming up next week. So we'll get into a lot more with Abraham coming up next week, guys. Okay. So, yes, Joe, we share a foundation in Abram, Jews, Christians, Muslims, right? You will find out. I'm going to leave you with the cliffhanger. Yes, that has to do with Abraham's descendants, with his family. And we're going to find out where. So the Jews, the Christians, and Muslims, all 3 of those world religions, all ascribe to this famous guy named Abraham. But who are his sons? What happens to his wife? What happens to the life of Abraham? And how messy is he really? Tune in next week to find out more. That's the plan, guys. Join me on Thursday morning if you want for Thursday morning meditation. It's a different kind of jam. We do a half an hour. We do scripture reading. We do prayer. And then we do a Holy Spirit shout out. Love to have you join us for some God stories and good God stuff on Thursday morning, 7:30 in the a.m. Otherwise, we'll see you on Sunday, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30. As always, make sure that you invite somebody, tag somebody, or send them a link. If you're coming on site, pick them up, bring them coffee or something like that, and join us for church on Sunday morning, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30. We're doing a sermon series on called Under God. Ooh, it's got to do with how we navigate this election season as Christian people. So make sure you tune in to that. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Thanks for hanging out with me. God bless you. Go lift some lives, elevate Christ, and yeah, go be God's church, a church for those who aren't here yet, guys.